folks, it's Jimmy Stewart here, hoping this is finding you all doing well. Now today's video, I'm going to start a series, well hopefully, and I've been talking about it for a few months, I just haven't got a chance to get to it yet. And I was trying to decide what I wanted to call it. Classic Guitar Week or Vintage Guitar Week, or I think I'll stick with Classic. But today's first entry on episode number 1, today's first entry is going to be the guy behind me here. Now some of you might have seen this before, some of you may have not. And this is the Gibson Les Paul Jr. Now this is a pretty neat example of a Les Paul Jr. because this is a 1954. This was the first year that Gibson came out with this model. Now on the success of the Les Paul that they had done prior, Gibson kind of thought they would try to get in and get a guitar that was a little less expensive and, you know, almost like a student model that they did. So they kept the body style. This is the exact same style really as a Les Paul Standard at the time, but it was quite a bit cheaper. The Les Paul Standard at the time in 1954 was going for about $225, $230 without the case. And they came out with these for $119 without the case. Now still that was a lot of money back in 1954, but more affordable for people to start bringing in that solid body electric guitar. Now remember, prior to that it was pretty much the Les Paul, the Tele, and you know, the 335s and the 125s and stuff like that, the semi-hollow jazz guitars from the 40s. So this was kind of a unique model, and Gibson took a big chance on these. So basically a Les Paul Jr., the difference between a Junior and a Les Paul Standard at the time was that it doesn't have the carved top, it's a flat top, it's a solid chunk of mahogany. The neck is made out of mahogany with a rosewood fretboard, no bindings or any of that kind of stuff. They put a single P90 pickup in here, and the bridge was basically a leftover stop bar from the Les Paul Standards. This bridge actually on this one, this was a couple of mods that ended up happening on this. This bridge actually was set right here where this two-pneumatic is. So it simply had a stop bar wraparound bridge right up here. And then the tuning keys on these guitars were sort of a teardrop, like a plastic resin type of tuning key. When I got this guitar in 1976, most of the tuning keys were missing. Most of them were bent. The guitar had been through the mill, and I bought it from an old country and western player in Virginia Beach in 1976. And I'll show you on the up-close video that most of the fingerboard wear and the fret wear on this guitar were confined to the first 5 or 6 frets. Back then, most of those guys weren't playing up here. The country picker guys were all cowboy chords all down here, so that's where the fret wear is. Other than the bridge, this is actually the original bridge, the stop bar. Again, it's a leftover stop bar from a Les Paul Standard. That's what they put on these guitars. This is the original, but I have moved it down and put a two-pneumatic bridge in here because I did use this guitar quite a bit in the 70s and 80s. And to try to keep it intonated, that's what I ended up doing. And of course I put a set of Gibson tuning keys on it to replace the old ones that were bent and or missing. So let me take you on a close-up view of this guitar, and we'll show you some of the things that they were doing in 1954 on the Gibson Les Paul Jr.
In 1954, they only had the one finish available, which is the sunburst that you see here. And it wasn't until 55 that they actually came out with the what's now referred to as the TV yellow. But so there's the original sunburst finish. As we go up the neck, you see it's nothing fancy. Just the single dot inlays as you go up, but a very nice rosewood fretboard. And the infamous 50s Gibson neck, they call it the baseball bat neck. And then you'll see that those are not the original tuning keys. I did have to replace those. And you can see the adornment on, no fancy adornment, just the gold lettering on there. No inlays. And there's those are around 76 tuning keys, Gibson. You can see where the original ones sat. And you can tell from the serial number there, this is a 54. Set neck, mahogany. And that was the beauty of the Les Paul Jr. It was just the simplicity of it. Slab of mahogany with a dog-eared P90 mounted right to the body. Gave it that sound. And of course the bumblebee capacitor that is in there, along with the way they wound those 54 pickups, just gave it a flavor. Just a nice guitar. Gibson just did a great job on these. Didn't spare any expense, except they just took all the fluff off of it and made it simple. And then your original bridge there, that was actually, a stop bar bridge for the standard tailpiece.
So there's the up-close video of the Junior, the 1954. It's pretty beat up, but hey, most of that damage was done prior to me. I pretty much babied this guitar for the last, I don't know how many years that is, 35, 34, 40, 50, I'm not sure. But I pretty much babied it. So most of the things that you see on here were done by somebody else over the years. Again, it's all original. The original P90 pickup here, the way they wound them in 54 makes it kind of unique. Also, something you'll hear about Les Paul guitars, or Les Paul Juniors anyway, is under here the volume and tone controls with the bumblebee capacitor is all original in here as well. So again, remember that back then the set neck guitars were a bit more expensive than the bolt-ons like the Telecaster, and so this cost a bit of money. But again, they were designed for the student, to try to get people into guitar without having to pay the prices they were asking for. You got to do the comparisons. $119 back in 1954 is like $1,500 today. The Les Paul Standard back in 1954 was $225, which was around $3,000 today. So quite a bit of money back then for a guitar like this. Although this was the least expensive model, and it did great sales for Gibson. I think they sold nearly 20,000 of these, and it wasn't really until later in the 60s that the rock and roll community really started appreciating what Gibson had done on the Les Paul Jr. They were a lot easier to get a hold of back then, and of course they were a lot less expensive, so the 60s guys started picking these things up. And one of the first really notable guitar players to really make the 54 become part of the rock and roll scene was Leslie West from Mountain. You'll recall Mississippi Queen, all done on a Les Paul. He had a 58, I believe. And then obviously later on with Jethro Tull, Martin Barr played all of Aqualung. Of course, the classic solo in Aqualung, and then all of the Aqualung album was done on a 58 Les Paul Jr. And a lot of great tunes on there. So to get an idea of the sound of what one of these will sound like, just play Aqualung and play Mississippi Queen. A lot of people use them, obviously. Of course, today you got Keith Urban, you've got Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day plays. He even has a signature model. John Lennon, post-Beatles, this was one of his guitars. He had to put a Charlie Christian hand-wound pickup up in the neck position, and that was his main guitar, really, after the Beatles stopped. That was John's favorite. And then, of course, you've got... So, that is episode 1, or volume 1, Classic Vintage Guitar Week here on the channel. So the 54 Les Paul Jr., again, I think it's a classic. It certainly is a vintage. The guitar is a year older than I am, so that's pretty old. So anyway, that will do it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. And for those that have subscribed, thank you so very, very, very much. I do appreciate it. So we'll end that for today with the 54 Les Paul Jr. And yes, it did come out of its case back in 2002. And Les did sign it for me there in New York City. There's a shot of it. Really good guy Les was. I didn't know him, obviously, but I did get a chance to meet him. We had a beer. He signed my guitar. And the one thing he said to me is, Jimmy, I don't want to see this on eBay. And I promised him he never would. So, 54 Les Paul Jr. Episode 1, Classic Vintage Guitars. We hope you enjoyed it, folks. Thank you so much for stopping in. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. And for those that have, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. So until next time, it's Jimmy Stewart saying so long, take care, stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye for now.